Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part 24 in this series, Science of the Symbols, and we'll be looking at alchemy. But so, for instance, last couple episodes mentioned the double-headed eagle has an alchemical symbol, and throughout this been especially looking at this very famous Jesuit, Athanasius Kircher, and especially this period, this 15, 16, 1700s, but he's at a very important time in this. And again, we see the double-headed eagle, the alchemical symbols, which also relate to the planets and to these Greek gods. How even the zodiac compares to these things, but the double-headed eagle and the double-headed eagle. Now, it's often used, but can be used in multiple levels. But with one of the consistent things in regards to this is it's an alchemical symbol, and by that I mean chemistry before the Royal Society. So alchemy is like just an artificial line in history where everything became chemistry. Before that it was alchemy, but there's more to it than that. And so, for instance, the double-headed eagle, which is famous in masonry, so even Freemason Oddfellow symbols are actually passing on much older information that goes back millennia in regards to alchemical or chemistry teachings and different aspects of that. So for instance, the Rosicrucians, the double-headed eagle, these alchemical symbols, before the periodic table, sulfur, mercury, salt, for instance, the double-headed eagle, the sun, gold, and the moon, silver. And we'll be looking more, but again, double-headed eagle, fermentatio, fermentation, and again, the double-headed eagle, and these repeated themes going. But there's just some examples of the double-headed eagle as an alchemical symbol. Even gold and silver is a nice one, particularly there. This is also an illustration by Athanasius Kircher. Earlier parts of his series I went through multiple levels of what's going on in here, but also alchemical knowledge contained therein. Now, for instance, the triple crown or the hierophant and the keys there, even like the tarot, the triple crown, the keys. But for instance, most famously, the papal symbol, so what you'll see is the silver and the gold key. Nice connection. In some mason boards, for instance, the triple crown appearing again, and this double-headed eagle of Kircher, and the triple crown again. So you just themes popping up now. This is a portion of Stefan Mikkelsbach, again, the alchemical wedding of sun and moon, gold and silver, the phoenix, but most importantly, these 7 figures around the outside: Venus, Aphrodite, Mars or Aries, Sun, Apollo, Mercury or Hermes, Moon, Diana / Artemis, Jupiter, Zeus, and Saturn or Kronos. Now, these symbols connected to the gods also connected to those planets, or the moon, not technically a planet, but the heavenly bodies, but also to the elements that we part of our periodic table and were used in and understood in ancient times. So, for instance, this Kircher drawing, we focus in there, and again we have these symbols, same thing represented there. It's there's multiple levels of meaning. There's measurement, astronomy, alchemy in there as well, and arithmetic and geometry as well as standards. So now this is a Stefan Mikkelsbach picture, and we see ignis, fire, air, earth, and water, and how they also relate to the 4 humors. Now, went in previous episodes, again you see the constellations, but we also have these alchemical symbols around here as well. So, for instance, that would be Tartar, and we'll come to that later. And there are a few, for instance, this one. Well, we'll get to those later, but for instance, this one is salt. We've seen, and I'll put some links again in the description, which I've put in other videos, because you have these alchemical dictionaries and some other interesting sites with old Rosicrucian drawings, for instance. But Mikkelsbach was famous for this. Well, it's Kabbalism. It's an important theme, and this drawing, again, we'll come to that, but again, the zodiac and alchemical symbols, sulfur, salt, and mercury, for instance. Now, what's interesting about this drawing, this is an alchemical drawing. It's got, okay, but now chemistry, when we think a typical chemist's lab, most famously the chemistry of in Breaking Bad as well. But the tools, the instruments, the processes used in chemistry, modern chemistry, are are essentially the same as alchemical labs. And we see the same tools and objects. We just don't have the pretty beakers and stuff that we have now. It's all meticulously clean as Heisenberg would have it. But the alchemical drawings, we see the same tools and objects and references to. She's got the beaker and the flask, and there we have the flask as well. Distillation and all these other aspects. But in the old time, the periodic tables and recipes were written in this form, as where the more almost looks like algebra style of writing down your chemistry now. But alchemy is chemistry. And where was it used? Now, a cathedral would be just a wonderful example of the level of alchemy. So whether it's to stain glass, not to make the glass, to put the colours in there, just like or the glazing on pottery is another example. The pigments, for instance, the Sistine Chapel, sacred blue, for instance. But all these colours, it's very some colours are easy to extract. Some of them are quite hard. For instance, royal purple. And also the metalwork in these wonderful sculptures or the candelabras and stuff. It doesn't just pop up out of the ground. You just beat it. There's science to it. This is, science is just prior to the way we use it now. Now back to this Mikkelspacher drawing. So we have the seven, the gods, the elements, and the planets in there, but also have these 7 steps here. So we just zoom in on them. Tincture, coagulation, distillation, putrefaction, solution, sublimation, and calcination, which are still used, and they're at the essence of chemistry still to this day. And so, for instance, a tincture is a extract dissolved in alcohol. So medical cannabis, for instance, or laudanum in the old days, where they would use opiates and put it into extracting, but it's medicinal. So there are a lot more tinctures than just these 2 examples here. But also in these Rosicrucian illustrations, so again we have these elements, but notice tinctura, and tincture throughout these. Again, you see a cross in these things, you immediately think, oh well, it's this or that. Well, no, it's very interesting. Coagulation. So more often, hemophiliacs lack the enzyme. Was it the enzyme? But they lack the ability for their blood to coagulate when you develop a scab. But that's coagulating blood. But it's also used in other processes such as cheese making. Interesting, like Aristaeus, this important god. Now this illustration as well, nice little connection. But he's the god of cheese, butter, and cream. So there's a nice connection. He's also the beekeeping as well, and connected to culture as well. That's just one of the aspects, because it's especially these classical gods an important aspect. Now this very well-known painting, illustration. What do we have? Coagula. So that's coagulation. And also by Heinrich Kunrath, very famous. Now what do we have? Leo. These again, alchemical throughout that, but coagula and solve, just like solve and coagula in this drawing, which come centuries later, and this again got demonized a bit and sort of misunderstood. Distillation. Well, everyone's probably heard of a distillery, but whether it's we use the same process in a petrochemical plant for kerosene, petrol, diesel, aircraft fuel, and also for plastics is another example. But moonshine or scotch, these are all from distilleries. His Conrad Gesner, this is a reference, but again, distillation, we see the Alchemical lab. Jan van der Straat, and again, if you want to look that up and get some more, but again, we see these old alchemical labs, which are not too different from what we're still using now, an example of distillation. This is an illustration from Johann Milius, but he's worth looking into if you're into this. But he references Cleopatra the alchemist of Egypt, 3rd century or 2nd century BC, and she's credited with inventing the alembic. So this is a, if you're doing your moonshine, also extracting oils to make perfumes is another example for medicine oil. This is a important tool. And putrefaction, which is also called blackening or fermentation. Now, fermenting wine is an immediate example. Also, tequila is, you ferment agave, for instance. But also, because tartar, I mentioned that earlier, but it's referenced again in the Isaac Newton's writings. But how this, so the leftover of the wine, also is then used within alchemy itself. Cream of tartar is if it's the purified version. Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of madness or of wine making as well, and wine. That's another connection with the gods there. And I showed this one earlier, the double-headed eagle, sun and moon, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury, Mars, Mercurius as well. You see the same things, even got a bit of an ouroboros going on in there, but fermentatio as well, the double-headed eagle, gold and silver. Mylius again, putrefactio as well, showing that. Now that's another example of putrefaction is decay, and that's what's going on there. Now solution, whether it's your aspirin, Gatorade, or even paint solvents is another aspect of those. And again, solve. So solve and coagula in this illustration, and again we see that on this alchemical drawing Azoth, the gold and silver, the alchemical wedding, then the peacock, same, it's all been covered. Sublimation, transition from a solid directly to a gas, so like dry ice would be an example, but again sublimato, when we see the phoenix and this the long-beaked bird as well, nice reference to Saturn there as well. And another example of sublimation is, well, there you go. Now, also this illustration, I forget, is it Francis Bacon? Could be, anyway, sorry, but again, sublimatio, and the ouroboros again being referred to in these chemical processes, and bit of calcination would be another one. So purification by fire, reducing to ashes, and then from the ash you can extract the salt and the powder, if you want to put it simply. And again, this being referred to back, notice the peacock as well, but the free birds here. Now this is relevant because of Arab alchemists. I forget the name of this, but again, the ouroboros again, the white bird, the red bird, and the black bird as well, connecting there, giving us hints. So it's from ancient times, from Egypt through the Greeks and Romans, through the Arabs into Europe, and again, calcination, and another reference to the ouroboros. So these older illustrations are actually, this is still very relevant to modern chemistry, and it's just again misunderstood. As above, so below, the sun and the moon, the caduceus, Mercury in there, the coagula and solve et coagula, solve and coagulate, solvent and coagulation. Now this is a Masonic coin. Now you might notice the ouroboros around the outside. George Washington centenary statue made for him. It's same thing, as above so below, coagulation, and well, nice reference there. Coagulation, these are alchemical processes, and this is from Oedipus Egyptiana by Athanasius Kircher again, the ouroboros, and this will be in the next few episodes. I'll be starting to go into this, but again we're seeing references to alchemy, and you notice Occident, the west, Orient to the east, Auster, like Austria or Australia, means south, and Boreas as in north. So south is up, and the east is, well, what we would in a typical compass to the west. So that's another thing about the way that these are orientated and how they connect to other symbols of the craft. sun and the moon. And with that, hope you enjoyed, and still a lot more to come. Cheers.